I'm going to read just a little bit from chapter 3 of my book, Justice Gone Haywire. Chapter 3 is called The Murder of Mary Phagan and Lynching of Leo Frank. At approximately 3 a.m. on Sunday, April 27, 1913, the night watchman of the National Pencil Company in Atlanta discovered a girl's brutally battered body in the factory's basement. Covered with sawdust, her skull was caked with dried blood, her eyes were bruised, her face slashed, and some of her fingers out of joint. A piece of rope, along with a strip taken from her own underpants, encircled her neck. She was soon identified as 13-year-old Mary Phagan, the child of a working-class family. She'd been employed at the factory, putting metal tips on pencils. She had recently been laid off because the factory had run out of the metal required for her job. On Saturday, April 26, 1913, Confederate Memorial Day in Atlanta, she planned to see the parade, but first wanted to stop out at the factory to collect the $1.20 in wages owed her. The killing captured the next day's headlines, and news about it would appear on the front pages of Atlanta newspapers for more than a year afterward. Much of Atlanta suffered a paroxysm of grief over this murder. About 10,000 people showed up at the morgue, and over 1,000 attended her funeral. Those grieving over the stranger were nicknamed Mary's people, while she became known as the Little Factory Girl. The crime touched an exposed nerve because it symbolized the vulnerability of young women during a time when the South was transitioning from a rural to an urban economy. During the first 2 decades of the 20th century, many ruined farmers migrated to the city, where they, their wives, and often their children got jobs in factories. When on farms, young women could be closely watched. Families were typically large and often extended, consisting not only of a mom and dad plus children, but of grandparents, aunts, uncles, and others. These systems often worked to protect young females from the sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, as well as the out-of-wedlock pregnancies that could result. The system was far from perfect, as sexual abuse takes place within families, but there was a popular sense that it usually protected females. Okay? However, the transition to an urban environment meant that very often young females, I'm not reading now, couldn't be closely watched, and they were often working under the supervision of older males, which made them very vulnerable. Now, older males didn't always take advantage of it, but they could, and some of them did. And that was why there was such nobody had known Mary Phagan before the murder, but she symbolized the vulnerability that so many of the people who had gone from farms to an urban environment felt. And that's why it led to a terrible tragedy. A man who was probably innocent, Leo Frank, was to a large extent railroaded because of prejudice against him, largely as a Jew, and to some extent because he was a northerner. And eventually he was actually lynched for this crime, which he probably did not commit. Almost certainly did not commit. Okay, and at the end of my article, I say, on the 80th anniversary of Frank's lynching, Rabbi Stephen Labow had a plaque placed on an office building at the site where Frank was killed, or I should say murdered. That plaque states, wrongly accused, falsely convicted, wantonly murdered. Over a century after her death, people have not forgotten the little factory girl who went to pick up her pay and never returned home. Her grave in the Marietta City Cemetery continues to be visited, and some people even leave gifts of toys and model angels. I hope that maybe somebody will buy this book. Justice on Haywire. It is about several cases in which people were wrongly convicted. Okay? And one of them, of course, one of the most famous, was that of Leo Frank, who was wrongly convicted and then actually broken out of jail and lynched for the murder of Mary Phagan.